Okay, I'm gonna start going ahead. Hi guys, I'm super excited to start this workshop. It's gonna be catered to Adobe Illustrator, and we have our wonderful graphic designer, Ramesa. Sorry if I botched your name or not.
No worries.
Yeah, but super excited. We're gonna learn a little bit more about Adobe Illustrator, some beginner tutorials into making things in Illustrator and other kind of unique art or graphic design details. Figma. Make sure to come out to the rest of our workshops. We've had two fire Adobe workshops this past week, and we're gonna have 2 more coming up tomorrow and Friday. So make sure to stay on top of it and keep updated with our social media, and we'll be posting and providing links for everyone that's interested in coming out to our next workshops for Figma and Framer. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Ramesa, and you can just start doing what you got to do.
All right, sounds good. Hi everyone, my name is Ramesa. I am a senior in graphic design at the University of Central Florida. I do a lot of things other than being a full-time student. I'm the secretary for the Graphic Design Student Association. I'm an art director for Strike Fashion Magazine. I am a MAPE 2021 finalist, and I'm also an AIGA Orlando Mentee designer as well. I'm also a freelance designer on the side as well. So just to show you kind of what I do, here's a little background on my work and everything for that. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Let me know if, all right, perfect. So I go by the design name Rahikal, which means pertaining to Ramesa Ahasan, which is my name. I do a lot of graphic design work when it comes to packaging design, UI, UX, editorial design, branding, such forth. I work around a lot with Adobe Illustrator. I work a lot with Photoshop. I work a bunch of times with InDesign. I work from various things from bridal party designs to poster designs that's going to be around school to infographics. I have done packaging design multiple times on a bunch of projects with a bunch of clients. I've done UI UX design as well, and I do enjoy UI UX design a lot. But today I'm going to be showing you kind of more on the main concepts of graphic design, which are more poster-esque design. So today I'm going to show you how to create this poster design. This was a project that I worked on a GDSA event. At one point, it was a Secret Santa where we had, I think, around 30 to 40 minutes to create a poster based off a specific person. So the person I was assigned was the vice president of the association, and she is a wonderful Latina who loves coffee so much. So you can see here, I did a more typography-based poster called Vaca y Café for cow and coffee. So I'll be teaching you that today. So let me switch the screen to this. So make sure you have Illustrator open up if you want to follow along as well, but you can also watch as we go. So I recommend, first off, you start off by creating a new file. And once you go on Illustrator, you hit on web. Also, if I talk too fast, you feel free to like shout out and I can like slow my tone down as well. But you definitely want to make sure that you are using the right color interface, since there are many color interfaces in Illustrator, in Photoshop, and InDesign, which is RGB and CMYK. RGB is the best for on-screen design, so the colors can pop out at you. CMYK is the best for print design. There is a huge difference when it comes to print and on-screen colors. The color tones can shift a lot if you don't have the right color mode selected for it. So I recommend the easiest way to make sure is you get the right color mode is you always click on web, and then we're gonna change the sizing to inches, and we're gonna work in an 11 by 17 format for the poster today. So once you have all that done, you can keep the DPI to 72. That's the most basic one for screen, but if you want to go to the highest resolution, it will be 300. So once you have that done, all right, so we're gonna start off. So I like putting my layers in separate layers where you have a background, a text, and I kind of do detail work. I always like separating out my layers so I can definitely keep organized and I know which layer I'm on and I'm not mixing or screwing up any layers. So what I do is when I choose a background, I always choose this rectangle tool. You see you have a lot of tools here. It might seem like a lot, but once you use Illustrator over and over again, it's gonna catch up to you and you'll know it so easily. But also some key tools is M is for the rectangle tool. So you just start off by matching the sizing to the background. As you can see, it has like a width sizing where it's 10.99. If you want the exact measurement, what I recommend doing is you just click once and then you can input the exact size measurement and height to make sure it's correct in the background. And then if you want to align it, the best way is you have the align tool where you can align the center points by clicking the middle buttons. It'll automatically shift into the background as well. So let's see, I'm gonna switch the background color today. What color do I want? Let's go for lilac today. And then once I choose the background color, I like locking it just so once I work over top with a bunch of text or a bunch of design elements, it doesn't mess around and like shift it over, because that can be the most annoying part about Illustrator is if you don't lock your layers, they will move if you accidentally touch them. But you can always hit Control-Z, which can undo the process as well. So next we're going to work on the text. I'm going to show you today how to work with the 3D effect in Illustrator, which is a pretty cool effect. I love working with it. I've been getting into the formats of like 3D and text distortion a lot recently. So you get to choose whatever font you want. I recommend choosing a very either thick extended typeface or a very condensed typeface, because that'll create the most impact when it comes to 3D work rather than a sans serif or a very thin typeface. So choose whatever word you honestly want to put down for it. And then to get this kind of color shift between the inner light and the dark outer part, what we're gonna do is, let me resize it. Because I recommend choosing a very light inner color and then a very dark outer stroke. So I recommend choosing somewhere on the same color gradient scale. But you can always, up to you, shift the tones if you want. So I think I might go for a little more slight orange for the outer part. And I also recommend increasing the strokes up here, because that can definitely impact it more and see it more compared to just having one stroke. You can't really see it as much. But when you start increasing it, then you can start seeing the defined stroke portion. All right, so once we have that done, you go up to here, which is the effect bar up in the tool panel, and then you click onto 3D. They have multiple versions where you can extrude and bevel, you can revolve, and you can rotate around. So you want to choose the extrude and bevel selection. And then once you do, you have this huge, like, cool format on like how to move around your 3D text and everything. The way to get into this exact format is you click on Isometric top. So it has that angle shift where you can see all the letters going down. And if you want to extend the points down here, you go on to Extrude Depth, and then you can increase or lower the depth of the typeface. Also, here's one cool thing that works with Illustrator. Once you don't expand your typeface, if you just shift it around, the bigger you make it, the smaller the depth will go, and then the smaller you make it, the more extended the depth will go. So just play around with it and see what sizing you like. I kind of want it a little bit longer, so I'm gonna have to shift it down. Also, if you want to make sure everything is the exact same size without like accidentally distorting the text, like as you see I did here, you always want to press shift and then you can move around with your mouse tool or your keypad or your mouse pad. And you can also like rotate it around if you want, and you can like move the letters and typeface around. But I like it how it's like that. Increase it a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna try putting this one here for today. Actually, no, here. And then you can either choose the same typeface you want, or you can choose a different one to play around with. And then there's two options where you can either input the text where you can stretch it out and just start typing. I recommend that's the best when it comes to working with paragraphs on Illustrator. If you're making any form of infographics or any kind of like menu where you have to type paragraphs, I recommend that's the best option. But when it comes to actual display typing, you hit the letter T just to open up the type text tool. And then depending on your artboard, since mine's a little bit big, I have to zoom in a little bit. But once you hit T, you just click it once, and then once you start typing anything in there, you can actually increase the size as you pull it. But if you type it as is, like the normal paragraph, you can't increase the size. It'll just increase the text box sizing, but keep the actual typeface size the exact same as you had it on there. And if you're wondering the shortcut key for the zoom tool, it's just the letter Z. So once I have that on there, if you just want to switch your fill text to an outline text, you just come over here and then you just swap the fill and stroke, and it automatically creates it into an outline. I like increasing my stroke and making it very prominent, so I just increase it to around like a 4 or 5. And then once you're on here, you can add in the color that you want. Also, I don't know if there's any questions going on in the chat right now, but I cannot see it, unfortunately, because I am sharing my screen. So if there's any questions, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask, feel free. And as you can see, when you're working with various typeface forms, on the screen share, it looks like it doesn't prominent out too much with the clash of colors, since orange and purple, since this purple has a very blue tone, it'll clash a little bit since they're complementary colors of blue and orange. But on my screen, it's clashing a lot, so I might shift it down a bit and mute it. All right, this one looks better. And once I get where I want it, I can play around with the sizing and everything and just shift it around. I always like overlapping text just because I like the way it looks, especially with outline text. You can see the actual background or any patterns underneath it as well. So there's a lot of ways to copy and paste in Illustrator. The obvious and easy way is Control or Command C, and then to paste is Control or Command V. But one of my tricks that I learned is if I want it like to be pasted in the exact same space so I can shift it down automatically, it's actually Control or Command F, where once you hit that, it'll automatically be pasted where the original artwork was, and then you can just shift it down, and that's the easiest way to do it, because once you hit like Control V, it just pastes it somewhere randomly on that artboard, or you can paste it off the artboard. And sometimes, especially when I work with a lot of menu designs and very like invitation where it has to be placed on a certain left align, right align, or on a certain guide, it gets kind of annoying when it gets pasted somewhere else. So this definitely helps where you can keep everything aligned in the same structure as well. Shift this down a bit. And since this is smaller, I'm just gonna decrease the stroke size a little bit. So I also want to show you another technique also, which is the expand tool, and that can create a huge difference when you start resizing your artwork. So once you select your work and you go onto object and expand, once you make sure your object and your fill is always checked in, because that will make sure everything, whether your artwork is filled or not filled, to make sure it'll stay static in the same size. So the one thing I like about this is once I have a stroke that I want to keep and I don't want the stroke size to change at all, once I start increasing it, the stroke size will always stay the same. But once I start increasing it on here, you can see the stroke size is getting much, much, much thinner compared to the one overlapping here. And then once you make it smaller, it gets much thicker or almost too jumbled up, as you can see. So that's the one thing you definitely want to do if you want the very same consistent stroke size. Is again, object and expand. Sometimes expand might not be highlighted, and if expand appearance is highlighted, click that one, then go back onto the object and expand will be open. You can click on that as well. And also the one difference between not expanding your strokes is when you expand a stroke, the one best thing is if you want it to be a certain height away, like if you want the same spacing in between, usually it comes up a little guide on when you expand all of them. It should come up. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does, but if you can see here, you might see a little pink line with two arrows hitting in. That is the spacing sizing tool, so you can ensure that you have the correct spacing in between. And that only works when you expand any objects, any typefaces on Illustrator. But when you have the actual typeface, just text written on there, it won't come up, which I find it a bit weird, but that's how the program is honestly built. So I can't complain too much. Also, what I like doing is to making sure that this doesn't shift out. I also want to expand. So as you can see here, expand isn't highlighted, but once I click expand appearance, it'll come up all these and it'll collect the whole entire thing for the object, including every little pinpoint. And then I just click expand. Also, the one thing I also like adding in to my work is I like adding grain textures, and Illustrator has this feature where it took in some features from Photoshop itself where you can include grain textures to your work. So especially getting that very grainy effect that you would see in Visco, especially like those old film cameras, you go onto grain and then you want to hit enlarge grain because that'll make them more defined in it. So you can see that it comes up a bunch of grain textures to the work, and then you let it process and everything. And then once you zoom into your work, this looks very digital, as you can see with art, but with design, you can see as a very old school grain effect. And these are great, especially when you're trying to make posters, especially posters when it comes to themes such as like music or concert posters. So gradients are also a very fun thing I love using on Illustrator. So you can see here, here's a bunch of shapes on these tools as well. So the circle tool is called the ellipse tool. And you can just shift and pull out your circle. Once I do that, I go onto the toolbar and they actually have a gradient panel right here. And you can just click on it, or you can click on here on the bottom where it comes up the gradient tool as well. And what I like using is you have different types. You have linear, which will create your standard like 90, 270 kind of like angle, and you can switch out the angles of the gradient positions as well. You have radial, where it starts from the center and expands out. But my favorite is freeform gradient. And in this style of gradient, what you do is you can draw and add in points to the gradient. And then once you have it, you can select colors and it'll automatically put them in the places of freeform. Let's see, let's try and work with this one. Yeah, let's do that. And what I also love is you can move it around and create all these freeform styles with it. And you can just shift the colors as well in there. Let's see, this one, I want it to be more yellow. Let's go with that. And as you can see, you can also expand it out where you can separate like certain gradient levels on the other side. I'm going to minimize this a little bit. Here. Let's try with that. And also, when you're in the layers panel, you can move around your layers if you want one on top of the other or one on the bottom of the other. So as you can see, some of my circles here are underneath the text. So if I specifically want it underneath the text, I just move the detail panel underneath the text. And then once I put it under, oh, this is why. This is why you all make sure that your things are in the right layer, because this is in the detail layer. So if I want to switch it out, what I just do is I select all of it, which is Control A, I copy it, and then I click on the correct panel, which is the text one. And then you can either go on to Edit, Paste in Place, which is Shift Control V, or you can press Control F. So it's going to be pasting in here, but of course it's going to take some time because the Illustrator program takes 70 years to put it down. And always make sure that you save your work, because the one slight downfall about Adobe programs that I realized that happen a lot, especially throughout my years working in graphic design school, is it can sometimes crash on you and shut everything down. And I remember one time working on a project up until like 11 at night, and then Illustrator crashed on me and I didn't save the file. So I definitely had to pull an all-nighter on that one. I just want to move this one to here. So then once you have it, as you can see, when you switch them out, the layers, it can go underneath it as well. And you can always rotate out your image. And you can switch how it looks and how the gradient comes in. And sometimes I like off-centering my shapes as well, which when you actually export it out into a PDF, a PNG, a JPEG, this portion right here, anything past the artboard line will be cut off, and it can kind of create like a cool effect with it as well. So I'm just going to copy, paste that in place, switch this around. I want to try different gradients for this one. So this one, let's do freeform again. Let's draw some points on here. Maybe it's 2 points. Let's go for pink. I want to go a lighter pink. And if you ever want to edit like a specific color that you select with the eyedrop tool, what you do is you go onto here, and then you can switch them out. I'm going to go for more pastel to go with that lilac. Here we go. And one of the things I'm going to actually increase this a little bit. I might add in another point here. I might do a darker cranberry here. This one I want to be smaller. This one I want to be much bigger. Actually, I don't like it now. I like that. I like this one better. Also, here's the rotate tool. So once you click on a point and once you hit shift, you can rotate it around a bunch of degrees as well. This definitely like works out when working with typefaces and such forth. Let's undo that. and ungroup that. So if you just hit the rotate tool or click R, you can input the actual area where you want it to rotate. And then once you hit shift, you can rotate it to that specific axis point that you click it on. So you can come up with different overlapping patterns on shapes and things like that. And then what I like to do is when I have a specific pattern or shape that I really like and I want to put them together, I just select both of them and I hit Control or Command G, and that will group it together and they'll automatically stick together. And of course, if you don't want that, you can either hit Control or Command Z, or you can go up to here and you go to Object and then Ungroup, and then it'll separate them again. That one here. Also play around with different scaling and positions because that can create a different visual hierarchy when it comes to people viewing the work. Because even though these are all on the same exact layer, as you can see, when you play around with scaling and different placements, such as pushing it behind the text or pushing it near the end or the front of the text, it can create this visual hierarchy where this seems like it's in the front and this seems like it's in the back, but they're all in the exact layer. And then of course, to create little solid circles, I just use the ellipse tool. And the command for that is just L. I might increase these ones a little bit. And then you just hit Control or Command F again. And then if you want the exact same spacing in between, you just hold the Shift button when pulling them down, and those little lines will come up to ensure that you have the same spacing in between all of them. I definitely want a more light pastel yellow for this one. So I'll go with this. So one of my favorite little tools that I also like using other than the 3D effect tool is I like playing around with a lot of polar grids and rectangular grids and then shifting them out around to create these kind of like futuristic effects with them as well. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So once I have it done and created, you come over here. Usually whenever you open up the Illustrator program, it looks like this tool just in the beginning, but you just right click it and then you come down here to the polar grid tool and then you hit Shift and then you expand it to the size you want. And make sure you have a stroke color on it. So then it'll show, because if you don't, then it'll just look invisible and then you can hover over it, but the actual linear work won't appear for it. So once I do that, I go to Object, then I go to Envelope, Distort, and Make with Mesh. And I recommend using 2 rows and 2 columns. So then it'll come up these little axis points around the edges of it. And then once that happens, I hit A, and that will be the direct selection tool. And the difference between this key and this key is when you hit the B button, it will select the whole thing and you just move the whole entire thing around. But when you hit the A button, you can select certain points and then you can shift them down, creating this cool pull down effect and almost this tunnel effect for the entire image. And it's the same exact thing when you're working with the rectangle grid tool. Because see, right now I don't have a color selected. So if I were to just click on it, I can hover over it and see the different linear points, but it won't actually show up. So make sure you have a stroke color picked out for it. So now it'll show. And then when you do that, hit envelop distort, make with mesh, and you can choose different rows, columns for it as well. Because when you do that, it comes up these and you can shift them around and play with the distortion of how it will look. So you can create this effect as if the grid is being pulled away from the like horizon point. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's an easy way to also do a clipping mask effect on Illustrator as well. So for instance, let's just say I really like how the lines look in here, and I actually want to create it to be a circle instead. So what you do is you make a circle, and I recommend making your clipping mask to be a full filled shape, and then choose a different color so it doesn't blend in too much, and make sure it's always on top of the artwork that you want to clip, because if it's underneath, then this will clip over the other one. So just to ensure, you always right click it and then you go to arrange and then send to back for the grid. Let me include some of this distortion to it. And then you hit both of them, and then you do Control or Command, and then you hit 7, and that is the key for a clipping mask. And so that will create this cool outline effect. As you can see, there's a little like archway going on around it, and it'll give the illusion of it being a circle as well. Now, if you want the actual outline as well for it, what I recommend is you always make a duplicate layer for it. And then you make that layer the same exact stroke and color as your grid line. And what you just do is you hit the eyedropper tool, which would just be the letter I for that shortcut. And then once you do your clipping mask, if you want the actual circle over it, the easiest way to make sure that it is aligned evenly and throughout is I just select them both, go to the line board right here, and I hit both the middle patterns, and then you have a little circle outline, and it touches all the points that you originally cut it off in the clipping mask as well.
Wait, sorry, I have a quick question. How did you get the grid to show up? Like, how did you get that effect?
Which one? This distortion effect?
Yeah, well, I was there for the distortion part, but I like missed out on how you like got the grid and like the other shape to show up. Like, I saw how
Like the actual grid itself?
yeah, like the actual.
Oh, okay. All right. So when you go onto here, usually Illustrator, whenever you open the actual program, it always has the default settings where it just has like all the main basic shortcuts. So usually a lot of people don't know is that when you right click on over the tools, there's actually hidden shortcuts and hidden tools behind it just to save up space so it doesn't take up half your screen in Illustrator. So it's usually behind the line segment tool. And then you have a bunch of different formats where you have the arch tool, spiral tool, rectangular grid, and the polar grid tool. So to get this actual polar grid is you just shift and then you pull with your mouse. And you want to make sure, again, your stroke has a color because as you can see here, this doesn't. So you did it, but it won't show up. But when you select it, it'll come up, but it's not going to show up in your actual work until you choose an actual stroke color for it. And then to do an effect for it, once you have it selected, you have the sizing and everything you want for it. You go to Object, Envelop Distort, Make with Mesh. And then I like doing 2 by 2 because it creates a certain point in the centerfold and around the whole area of the shape that you want. You click the A tool, which will lead you to your direct selection tool. You can grab the center point and then you can shift it up, down, around to the side to create that tunnel effect where it looks like this is the front and then this is the back, and it creates almost a 3D effect with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And the same thing goes for the rectangular grid tool. When you do it, you can choose different columns, rows, and sizes. And when you have that, you can change out the columns and everything. And then you can switch out the little grid styles. But it's not only just for shapes and stuff. You can actually do it with text too. And especially in my work, I love using different effects on my text where I like squiggling them a little bit. So what I do is once I have a text, it's better, I recommend, when you do it on expanded text, just because when you have a typed text, it can affect the spacing in between when you start typing out like sentences or words after it. So it can definitely shift the whole kerning in between the letters. So I recommend expanding it just so you have the same spacing in between all the letters and it stays consistent. But you go to Object, Envelop Distort, Make with Mesh. I usually like doing 3 by 3s just so you have a very easy plane to work with. Once you have that, you hit the letter A and then you select a full row that you like, and then you just shift it out a little bit. And then you can create all these little warp effects with text. You can pull the bottom down and almost expand it like it's melting away and everything like that. But I definitely like working on with that tool. But another tool in Illustrator is you go to Effects, and then it should be here. You go to Warp, and my favorite one is I like using the flag one because you create a very consistent type of wave and shape when it comes to it. So you just input how much you want to bend. For instance, I'll do probably 2. And you can choose a horizontal or a vertical. So when you choose vertical, it's going to shift the wave downward and upward. And then when you choose horizontal, it'll go from the left plane to the right plane. And once I do that, it kind of creates a slight warp text. And I usually like doing very subtle warps, as you can see. So you can see here, it's very straight, it's very linear, but here you have a slight curve. And I like sometimes doing that in my work because sometimes even from far away, you can still see the subtle trace of the warp text. Now let's just say, for instance, I wanted to fill up the artboard a little bit more. I just wanted this to just expand out a little bit more just so it has more room and not enough like white space here. What I usually do is I select the groups I want and then Shift V. And then when you pull from a certain angle, for instance, I pulled from the bottom right corner, it'll keep the left corner the exact same and aligned. It's going to take some time because it's rendering that 3D effect. Usually when you do effects such as for 3D and stuff, it'll take a bit of time to render, but it'll appear soon enough. So this one I want to make it just a little bit more brighter. Let me try pastel, maybe that will stand out a little bit. And then if I wanted this on another point, if I just want to expand it, once I expand it, I can't play around with the shifts of any more of the meshes or anything like that. So once you expand it, it's gonna be solidified exactly as that. So I always recommend either making a duplicate of it or you can leave it as expand if you want. And let's just say, for instance, these are off-centered a little bit, but I want them to be centered exactly. I just select it. And if you want to select a whole entire group, you do select them all. And then you hit Command or Control G, and that'll group them all and keep them all together. And if I want to keep it very center aligned, you just hit this one, this vertical point, because you can see here, they have the objects here, and this is center aligned through the middle of it vertically, and this is center aligned through it horizontally. And I just play around with it, move it around a bit.
Just letting you know, yeah, 5 more minutes. Just
All right. And then if you ever want to export it out as PDFs, JPEGs, or PNGs, this is the easiest way to do it. The easiest way to export out PDFs is you go to File, you hit Save As, and then you hit PDF. And then usually when it comes to PDFs, it'll always have that Use Artboard automatically checked out no matter what, because it will shift it to the exact size of the artboard itself. So no matter what, whatever is your image or background size, it will export it out to that exact size. So that's one of the greatest things about PDFs. But for instance, let's just say you make an artwork that you wanted to post on Instagram per se. You can't necessarily post PDFs on Instagram. You would either have to export it out as a JPEG or PNG. So when you're trying to do that, you go to File, Export, Export As, and then here you can do whatever you want to name it, and make sure you hit Use Artboard, because if you don't hit Use Artboard, it will take this entire artboard and its background as well. So you'll have like all of this, export it out as well. But when you click Use Artboard, it will do to the exact size of your image and background shape. And I always recommend always export out to the highest setting so you can get the full resolution and everything for it. And the same thing goes for when you export it out into JPEG. You just click it, use Artboard there, And always make sure when you are doing especially screen work, such as going onto websites, onto going Instagram, onto going mobile apps or different social platforms, make sure it's an RGB. RGB is the best color mode for screen design, and then CMYK is the best for print design. Once you have this, let's see if I can show you. If you ever want to see what your work looks like without exiting the program, you hit View, Presentation Mode, and then that'll create a full presentation mode of the exact image size. So that is the exact posters with the exact artboard line cut to the exact sizing of 11 by 17. And so that is how to work some of the tools in Illustrator. And there's definitely a bunch of more tools where you can work with perspective tools. You can definitely work with blend tools where you can blend out text and create a very much repetitive effect on it. There's so much you can do onto Illustrator, and there's so much you can learn from as well.
Thank you, Ramesa. We have one question from Laura. She's
Yes.
asking, what mode would you put it in if you needed for it to be shown both for print and on screen?
Okay, so I will actually show you a personal version. I told you I'm an art director for a fashion magazine, so here it is. Here's the magazine we created as a student organization. So what I recommend is if you ever want to do print and both digital, I always recommend put print before digital, always, because that comes first, especially when you're making a physical copy for your client, for yourself, for any schoolwork. So always put it in CMYK first. It will make a slight color shift digitally, but it's so little. But when you go from digital to print, it will create a huge color shift effect. And I can show you an experience, especially when it comes to photography. If you're going to be working around that, it can create a huge difference. So you can see here, the photo here, it's very saturated, it's very bright. You can see all the colors for it. And this is in CMYK format. But if you accidentally export out into RGB, it's going to desaturate the photos. And this accidentally happened. This was our first test magazine and everything, so I can understand there were some issues with it. But again, if you don't export out, especially your print files, into CMYK, a bunch of desaturation can happen, especially when it comes to photography. And then you'll have a color shift, especially when you do very much graphic design work for like posters and such forth.
Hey, that was really cool. That probably concludes our workshop for today. Thank you, Ramesa, for coming out and showing us a little bit about Adobe Illustrator. I personally found it really interesting, and I did not know some of the tools you talked about, so it was really nice to see how they work. If you guys are interested in the rest of our workshop week, like I said, there's 2 more coming up, and you can just hop on our socials and check out the times and ask for links. But overall, we are done, and thank you guys for coming out. It was really fun, and I appreciate Ramesa for putting a wonderful workshop together.
Of course. Also, if anyone's interested to see more of my work or just to connect with me,
Yes.
Here are my social platforms, my LinkedIn, my Instagram. I must warn you, my Instagram and my portfolio, I haven't updated for a couple months. I'm currently working on that right now, so you're going to see a definitely like shift and change on my work for that. But thank you so much, Krupa, for having me over for this workshop. I am honored, especially since this is my first workshop ever. So I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it and got informed as well.
No problem. Thank you to you too. Yeah, that's about it.